This episode, number 208, is brought to you by the patrons of Cider Chat. Help this podcast continue to produce select programs like this week's episode featuring Tasting Calvados and American Brandy. Sign on via the Cider Chat Patreon page at Patreon, spelled Patreon, or make a donation via the donate button at ciderchat.com. Hello and welcome to Cider Chat. My name is Rhea Windcaller and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. This week, you're going to be hearing a recording from the 25th Annual Franklin County CiderDays. And the presentation is on tasting Calvados and American Brandy. It was presented by both Ambrosia Borowski of the Northman Cider Bar and myself on the Friday night kickoff event. There'll be more coming up straight away on that. I have an email from our friend Marcel in the Netherlands, and I really want to share it with you because it's super positive and it's exciting to hear what he's doing there. If you recall, I mentioned a while ago that he's been kind of like listening to the podcast nonstop, catching up on all the archived episodes. And with now 208 episodes, that is a lot of listening. So he wrote, and this came in on January 8th, so I imagine he's kind of caught up by now, but he says he only has 3 more to go, and I can't wait to start on the Patreon exclusives. So way to go, Marcel. There is a lot in each episode, and they're little like pearls of cosmic wisdom is the way I like to see it, weaving into the story. And what he's referring to, the Patreon exclusives, if you are a patron of Cider Chat via the Cider Chat Patreon page, there is extra audio content there, and a really amazing one with Ryan Monkman on barrels, where he just dug deeper than the one that's published. So it's a extra Benny for being a patron of Cider Chat. So pretty cool. Anyways, he wrote that, from listening to all your podcasts, I'm glad to say there have been some real improvements in my cider making skills. Some of them I want to highlight. The first one, I guess he got a lot out of the Stinky Cider episode with Rebecca DeCramer of Scott Labs, and that's helping his cider really kick out. He's using old Dutch varieties and primarily fermenting with culinary apples. And it also sounds like the second point is, from all you're talking about persimmons, I could not resist. Next week, about 200 kilograms of persimmons are coming in. Obviously not grown in Holland, but I'm really thrilled to start pressing them. How exciting. Oh, I want to have an update on that. Just make sure that they really ripen. I mean, they ripen to the point where they're like mega squishy. And the skin is probably a lot thicker than you realize, but a persimmon comes in hard and then it really starts getting almost squishy. It's kind of scary squishy. It's like almost like bullet, but not. So do watch that if you're not used to persimmons. The third point he wrote, I own a few quince trees and would really love to get some more details about how to make them into cider. The only thing I heard was to put a few quinces into a fermenter, but is there also pure quince? Well, I have heard that some makers have made pure quince. I have never tasted that, and I don't know if I would do that. Most of the makers I know are using it as an addition to the cider, and it's super aromatic, and I'm actually doing that right now with one of my ciders. I have about 5 gallons that is conditioning, and different regions of the world will have different quality quinces. Some are much more likely to ripen. I'm in a growing zone, where it is hard to find a really well-ripened quince, but it's not that it can't happen. And I am on the quince path to try to find out more info about that particular palm. So as I do, I'll pass that to everyone's attention. But as it is right now, I don't know anyone who's making 100% quince. If I'm wrong about that and somebody out there in Ciderville knows, please let me know so we can let Marcel know that and everyone else. The fourth point is, he wrote that he grows herbs, and actually that's their main business, including some herb liqueur. Implementing the herbs in my cider got my attention in the podcast. So I think the fact that you're hearing, Marcel, that, yeah, a lot of people do that, use ginger. Let's see. I've had, it's kind of like a sizer where somebody was using cayenne. The sky's the limit. It really depends on what you like, and sometimes the herbs could really mask it. There's lavender ciders. Yeah, people definitely use herbs. In short, he says, the main thing I took from it, I am very pleased to join the Peter Mitchell education course starting January 20th, coming right up then. He's got labeled bodies ready with good, bad, smelly, sweet, dry, etc. cider to take with me for the sensory analysis class. Without all the recommendations and the many times I heard Peter Mitchell mention, I would still be thinking, oh well, someday in the future I would like to go there. But now it's real. I can't wait to fill my head with cider information over this whole week. Oh, badunk. Badunk, Marcel. I love this. And your courses come right up. Do keep me posted. I'll pass that on. I didn't realize you mentioned Peter Mitchell so often, but there you have it. Thanks again for writing, and I'll keep on producing episodes. Hang in there. We're going to go straight into our featured presentation on this episode 208, and that is a pre-recorded presentation of the Calvados and American Brandy tasting at the 25th Annual Franklin County CiderDays. There's going to be a number of things that are going to be covered in this presentation, such as the history, how to taste spirits, regulations, regions, and maturation. That includes barrel types, climate, and blending. So this presentation, I feel, is going to give you a really nice overview of these two products, one being a French product and another an American product with the same basis of apples, and allow you to approach that a little bit more deeper than perhaps you might have never had the opportunity to do before, because Calvados is so unknown in so many parts of the world, truthfully, even in France. And so we'll talk all about that. And the presentation was conducted by Ambrosia Borowski, who's the general manager of the Northman Cider Bar in Chicago. There's two locations, one in the north end, I guess like northwest section of Chicago, and the other one is open during the summer months, and that's on the riverfront, or the Riverwalk area. It's not really on the lake, but on the waterway going through Chicago. And like all large cities, there are places that you could do ferry rides, and Chicago's no different. So that, I have never been to the riverfront location, but I heard it's just slamming it. Both locations are just absolutely amazing in my mind if they are pouring cider. So Ambrosia really took the lead here. I was the lovely assistant, and we had a hell of a time. It was so much fun. I learned a lot, and I hope you will too. What I do want you to know is that there are a number of slides that you could follow along with. You have two different options here. One is you can now just listen to the episode, of course, and then go to the show notes for episode 208 and look at the slide show there. Or you could go to the Cider Chat YouTube channel and listen to this full episode there, and also see the slides in real time as we're presenting them. So it's a static presentation, but there's a lot on the slides. You'll be able to see the actual products that are being offered and get the names of the products that were being served too. I think that's very helpful. And that's about it. I'm going to roll through that presentation now. Make sure you have your glass. You are so going to be thirsty. And probably some notes too, because there's a lot here, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. This is the Calvados and American Brandy tasting from the 25th Annual Franklin County CiderDays with Ambrosia Borowski and Real Wind Caller. everybody. Welcome to the 25th Annual Franklin County CiderDays. A banner year indeed. Yeah, let's a little applause there. A little applause. It's pretty amazing. How many folks in here this is your first CiderDays ever? Can you do a little show of hands? Okay, welcome. Great. So I know there's people here from all over the map, and it's a really exciting weekend. And this is kind of like it's a premier kickoff event for Cider Day. This evening's tasting is going to be on both Apple Brandy from the U.S. and Calvados. So we'll be getting into that shortly. But before I move on, again, I want to repeat for anybody that's just been coming in that you have stemware there, two glass. On the bottom of your stemware are all the numbers. It's numbered from 2 to 6, okay? And before I go further, before we do a toast, I'd like to introduce, and if you could go to the next slide there, I'd like to introduce Ambrosia Borowski. She is from Chicago. She's the general manager of the Northman Cider Bar, the number one cider bar in the country. She's been involved in this for quite a while, and her background in French culture. Well, really, I just want to say the reason why we're doing this is just so that Ambrosia and I could have a reason to drink spirits. So that's why we're here tonight, and I think that's why you're here too tonight, also. But she's been involved in the French culture, speaks French, is fluent in France. Like myself, she's been over to France probably many more times than I have been.
A lot. I go a lot.
A lot.
It's like my vacation home. Just get out of here.
And all these bottles up here were basically curated tonight by Ambrosia. So she has a fine taste for it. The Northman Cider Bar has the most extensive list of Calvados in the country. So it is the go-to spot for that. And our hope tonight is that you get a sense of, the difference between Apple Brandy and Calvados, and just get a sense of where it could take you. So tonight is a little bit of that journey, a first kind of stepping stone. And as far as I know, really like one of the rare events in the country for tasting this amazing spirit. And we have some amazing U.S. brandies here tonight too. In fact, there are 6 glasses for each person here, but there is going to be a 7th tasting tonight too. So as your glass gets empty, our lovely volunteers, because Franklin County CiderDays is all volunteer, they'll be coming around and giving you that 7th pour, which is a special brandy tonight from Maryland. And we have Maryland in the house. We have the makers here. Can you put your hands up here? Right over there. So Jeff so kindly donated that. A little bit about Ambrosia and myself. My name is Rhea Windcaller. I am the producer and host of Cider Chat podcast. Has anybody heard of Cider Chat out there? There's a couple of people. Okay, good. So if you don't know what a podcast is, it's a radio on demand. And I also lead Totally Cider Tours. We did the second annual New England Cider Tour yesterday. And I love spirits. So let's begin this first evening, though, with a toast. So if you could get your glass, which is the 25th anniversary glass of Cider Days. This is actually Uncle John's brandy here that we're trying.
Yep, Uncle John's out of Michigan. Actually just won an award at Glint Cap for this brandy, made with his blend of heirloom and culinary apples and aged in used oak.
So if we could all raise our glasses. And I'd like to salute the apple, which all began this, and also to Franklin County, to Cider Days, which was really a touchstone moment. 25 years ago, it was a one-day experience, and here we are 3 days, and we are saluting at a Calvados and Apple Brandy tasting. It's absolutely amazing. So cheers to all of you, to Franklin County Cider Days. Cheers. And I'd like to say one more thing. Each time as you're cheering, because there's going to be a lot of cheering tonight, one thing that I learned being in France is when you cheer, you actually grab the glass, if we could, just like and we don't kind of go like this, hey, I'm drinking. No. It is, you look at the person in the eye.
You have to.
And cheer. You want to do that. And it's a beautiful thing. It really kind of brings a spirit. And so I think we're going to have to drink again there.
So we are professional brandy drinkers. So don't be, if you guys don't want to drink everything that's in these glasses, because everything is at about 40%. We do have some that are over 40%. The volunteers would be happy to bring around dump buckets that we do have over here if you would like to drink responsibly, which I encourage.
And one more thing, you have a little cheese plate here. This is gluten-free, so if there's anybody concerned there. And you have two pieces of Camembert, two different kinds of Camembert, a blue cheese, a brie, and a cheddar. And why don't we go to the next slide?
Great. So these are all of the brandies that we have here tonight. And all of these were donated, by the way, all of these producers. So if you are using social media, make sure to tag them and thank them. And if you enjoy it, go buy it. We did ask them all for lists of where you could purchase it in various parts of the U.S. So if there's any question about that afterwards, please feel free to ask. So we have the Uncle John's Apple Brandy, which is your cheersing, your number one glass. The second glass is Ryan Hall. This is their oak-aged American Apple Brandy from Chicago, Illinois. Copper and Kings is number 3. These guys are coming out of Louisville, Kentucky. Of Claque Pepin is going to be 4. And this is Normandy. You have to have it made. It has to be made in Normandy in order to be called Calvados. We'll talk about that later. The Coquerel is going to be number 5. And Chauffeur is going to be number 6. And we'll go into them a little bit in more detail now or later. As we get there.
We'll get there. Yeah.
Great. So we'll leave this one up here. And we'll also have it at the end if you wanted to take a photo of it or any of the bottles that are up here as well.
And we should say that some of these are difficult to find. Certainly, even the American brandies could be difficult to find, and the Calvados too. But part of our hope here is that you'll start asking for that at your different places that you buy your spirits, and start bringing that in, so we could all keep on enjoying some of these amazing Calvadoses that are on the market.
Somebody asked earlier if Calvados was Spanish, and I think that's so funny. When thinking about the word and where it comes from, because it is Latin. Yeah, it's Calvados. It's not Calvados. It's not Calvados. It's not Calvados. We've gotten all of these. It's Calvados. I'm sure all of us in here are familiar with how to taste a cider or something that's just fermented. With spirits, it can be a little trickier. So just wanted to talk about a couple of the tasting points with spirits. So obviously the look, and it's a little dim in here. If it's brown, it's been barrel aged. That's pretty much all you really need to know about the look, unless you're professionally evaluating it. Now the smell. With anything that's just fermented, you typically swirl the glass a bunch before you smell it. You don't need to do that with spirits. In fact, when you swirl it, what you're doing is you're taking the volatile alcohol, the volatiles, and you're pushing them to the very top of the glass, and it's actually just going to make you smell alcohol, which is burning, and also kind of numbing, which that's the part of alcohol I think a lot of us like. So if you do accidentally swirl it, which I've been in the habit to do, especially if I go from a cider to a spirit, you can just blow on the top, and it'll push the alcohol back down. If you can't get any sort of smell off of it, then a gentle roll is the most appropriate because it is so high in ABV. Now, when you bring it to your nose, what you're going to want to do is you want to keep your mouth slightly ajar and breathe in like that. And what that'll do, you should try it. Try it with keeping your mouth open, and try keeping your mouth closed. When you keep your mouth open, what you're doing is you're allowing the airflow to prevent you from just smelling the ethyl alcohol. So it's going to allow you to get more different aromas, which Brandy Aromas, someday I'll have a wheel. But Brandy Aromas, you're getting things that are kind of similar to whiskey because you do have the barrel aging component, but you do have some things that are very specific to brandies. You're going to obviously have more fruit notes, but you can also get a lot of different types of sugars like caramel, butterscotch, apple tart, licorice, molasses. Floral notes can still be there, and you'll get things like resin, sap, mushrooms can even be there, depending, and you'll see the more the mushroom and more the vegetal when we get up into the Calvados because of how they ferment. But just keep that all in mind when you're smelling and thinking about how it makes you feel, how it smells. So after you smell it, it's time to taste. Now, with brandy, you always want to take 2 sips. The first sip is to shock your palate or equate your palate or get your palate ready, because it is such a high ABV. And if you're not used to drinking something that's so strong, you have to acclimate, like jumping into a pool almost. So take the first sip. That's pretty great. And then the second sip is the one where you can start to think about how the brandy is presenting itself. And with brandy, you don't want to do that thing that you do with cider or wine where you swish it around and suck in oxygen. You don't need to. It's 40%. What you want to do is you want to chew. And if you've ever had a French man yell at you about chewing your brandy instead of slurping your brandy, you'll never do it again. You feel that tingling sensation. It can tell you a lot about the brandy as well. But just really get in there and let your whole mouth experience the brandy. And then the last thing for the taste is going to be the finish. The finish is going to give you more flavors. The finish will also tell you about tannin, talk about maybe the apples that are being used or the barrels themselves as well come out with the finish. And then lastly,
I think you need to imagine. So part of that is imagine where that came from. And some of us are lucky enough to actually visit the makers from time to time. And that gentleman up there, his name is Philippe, and he is a Poré Ferme. He is a prairie farmer. He's based in the region of France in Normandy called Domfronte, and they are primarily making Calvados there with a base of Poré. And so when I open up a bottle of Philippe's Calvados, I'm able to imagine being in next to those ancient barrels. Sometimes, much larger, but in his case, it was like tipping your head in and walking in to this like little back room. The cows are in the different background. That's a little bit of the flavor. Let the spirit take you there.
The history of brandy is pretty cool. We get it from the Dutch, right? It's Brandon. I don't speak Dutch, but Brandon Vina, I think is how you say it.
Ik spreek geen Nederlands. Ik spreek kombucha.
Okay.
Niet zo goed. She didn't know that. Yeah, I worked in the Netherlands. Branden.
And then this one?
Wien.
Okay. Branden Wien. There it is. It means burnt wine. So what they were doing is as they were settling a lot of areas and using a lot of trade, they were using all of their ships and their amazing technology that the Dutch had. And in order to save space on the ships, they would put a distilled version of wine into the barrels, ship it to its location, and then water it down to get it down to that ABV that they were looking for. But then they realized over time that the distilled wine was just as good as it was, and they didn't need the wine anymore. So burnt wine came into Branden wine, which became brandy. So brandy is defined as any potable distilled spirit from fruit. So brandy, what we most of the time think about is coming from grapes. But it doesn't just have to come from grapes. It could come from cherries. It can come from pomace, which is the stems and the seeds. That's how we get grappa. We have pisco. And then apple brandy, which is where my heart lies. And yeah, that's another thing. If you ever find an apple brandy from somewhere weird, I'll be the first one to help you taste it. So American Brandy, the first record of it is going to be 1640. If that just gives you a start of where that timeline starts for the U.S., 1640. In France, it's 1553. So it's actually not that far off from each other. And so what happened in the U.S. is that you have a lot of people bringing all of their apples over. We all know this from our history of bringing their apples over, bringing their stills over, and making apple brandy. The problem with the sustainability of the brandy market was that because it's so seasonal in a distillery, you're only really doing it during 3 months out of the year. When the harvest comes in, you're fermenting, distilling it, and you're done. So it's not a year-long operation for a distillery. And so as history went on, it became smaller and smaller of a priority for a distillery, and especially when Prohibition happened. During Prohibition, there were seven brandy distilleries that were able to keep their license open and give medicinal brandy out. And so that helped. That helped. But even Laird's, which a lot of people associate with one of the biggest apple brandy distillers, they couldn't distill. They actually went to fully non-alcoholic. And then right after Prohibition, Laird's was one of the first to get their distillery license back and start distilling again after Prohibition. But it never really picked back up as far as our history goes. And we know this about cider. We've all talked about it. But it wasn't until the 80s that you started to see these distilleries pop up with this new movement that was going on. You have St. George that opened up in Armida in 1982, Germain Robon, 1983, and then Clear Creek up in Oregon was 1985. And so that's when we started to see apple brandy come back. Another thing that happened is the craft distilling started to become popular. And if you're craft distilling and you're able to make vodka and whiskey and all these other products, then you can carve out some space to do some fruit brandies as well. And so that's helping the American brandy scene grow. So the next one that we have here is Ryan Hall. These folks are in Chicago. They are close, dear friends of the Northmen and myself. They get their apples from Illinois and Michigan. They bring all their apples on site. And then we all get together and do an apple crush, and it's really gross and it's really fun. But they throw the full apple into the shredder, and then they take all of the crushed apples. They don't press them; they go straight into the fermentation tanks, and and this is the German style of apple distillation, from what they've told me. And so they ferment it on skin with the apples in it, and then they pump that straight into the still. And they are fermenting with particles in, distilling with particle in. And they have a combination copper pot still, and they have 4 plates on it. So it helps them control it just a little bit better. They're aging for about 12 months in new bourbon. And you'll really be able to taste that with their product. How do you guys like this one? The history of Calvados has its complications as well. They had a couple of wars that they went through up in Normandy, and it was in 1942. It was right between the wars that all of the distillers got together and gilded to make sure that they would save their heritage and their brandy making. They almost all just use, especially the small ones, just use a copper pot alembic still, just like cognac. It's very similar in that process. In fact, they borrowed a lot of their rules from cognac because cognac was already doing it, and why reinvent the wheel? Now, we all know that the region and the climate is really going to express a lot on an agricultural product. The climate in Normandy is going to be mild summers, and cold but not frigid winters. The climate ranges anywhere from 52 degrees Fahrenheit to like the mid 70s. So it's very temperate. And they have about the same rainfall that Wisconsin does. So those things combined really make it a prime growing region for apples. If you don't remember your geography, Normandy is at the very top of France. France is almost like a pentagon, and Normandy is at the very top. Apple production and brandy making used to be made throughout the entire country until some stuff happened with Louis XIV. See me after if you want to talk about Louis XIV. And it isolated apple production up to the very north. But it made the most sense, too, because apples grew better there anyway, and apples are better, and it's better up there anyway. So it worked out just fine for them. And if you think about its geographic location, it's also right across the water from south of England, which is, as we know, another great apple growing region. So the climate just really makes sense there, and they've been doing it for so long that they've got it down to a science. Climate in the U.S. is going to be a lot different because it is huge. We have a lot of different regions here. We have a lot of places that we can grow apples. The brandy that we have here tonight is going to be pretty Midwest because I brought it. I actually had one of my former bartenders drive it over to Rhea to make sure it got here. But I'm really excited to see an East Coast brandy versus the Midwest brandies, just to see the difference in terroir in the U.S. And that would be a whole other tasting, which I think would be really fun.
And if I can interrupt, if you've had some of the brandy and you have an empty cup, you could raise your hand, and some of our servers will graciously come around and give you a pouring of the St. Freud from Maryland. So if you have an empty glass, that's the seventh piece too. So you could have a little bit of that too to just compare.
So the third brandy that we have here for you is Copper and Kings, and some of you might be familiar with Copper and Kings. The former owners of Crispin, the cidery, opened up in Louisville, Kentucky, the heart of bourbon, which is whiskey with an E, just to be clear, not whiskey without the E, because that stuff is amazing. But they are in the heart of bourbon country. And to be a brandy distiller in the heart of bourbon country, post-prohibition, can be a little difficult. They are pretty heavy-handed with the barrel because that's what makes the most sense there, and it tastes delicious. So it's going to be a lot heavier in barrel than the two previous ones, which is a good contrast to see the two. Another thing to know, so they are using a pot still, and they're doing a double distillation. This product right here is new. It just came to the Chicago market for me. The old blend that they used to finish it in sherry casks, and the sherry casks were just a bit too fruity, didn't really let the apple shine. So now they've switched over to a combination American French, I believe. And they're doing a non-chill filtration on it. And they've taken away all of the sherry finish on it. So the apple actually comes through a lot more than it used to. And pretty happy that they made that change. You guys notice the barrel on number 3? These guys are using ex-bourbon and some new. But when you're in the heart of bourbon country, it's pretty easy to get your hands on some bourbon barrels. Another cool thing about Ryan Hall is that you can see this bicycle wheel here. They used to crush all their apples with a bicycle hooked up to the crush. And so they would just pedal to crush them. Great. So the am I saying that right? St. Freud? St. Freud? St. Freud.
St. Freud from Maryland.
Saint-Foy. Okay. Is that how you pronounce it? Actually, is it like LaCroix or LaCroix? Is it? Okay. Saint-Foy. So this is Grimes Golden, made from, it's 100% Grimes Golden. Great. And it is at 41.6%, so it's just a little bit stronger. Twice distilled in an alembic still, copper pot. Wild yeast. So you're using all wild yeast for it?
It's 10 months old.
Okay. Where's your orchard? Cumberland, Maryland. Western Maryland. This is a single varietal brandy, which you don't see very often. Brandies tend to be blends. I mean, sometimes grappa will do that. Sometimes grappa will be single grapes. But it's interesting to see this popping up. I'm wondering if it's going to be a trend or if people will start to do this more of using single varietals. Thank you again for sharing this with us.
Thank you.
This is all about, the difference between American brandy and Calvados. There's a lot of protection. If they didn't double down on these regulations, especially with those wars going on, it would be in a different state. This also makes it more uniform, so you know what you're going to get. And maybe that's exciting about American brandy, is that it's a wild, wild west, and you can pretty much do whatever you want and call it brandy. But maybe there's some comfort in knowing that when you get a $30 bottle of Calvados, you know exactly what's in there because they have to, especially if they have their AOC. And so here I'm looking at just regular AOC regulation. I've got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different laws on what you're allowed to do. And I did omit 5 of them that were just, we don't care. They're very specific ones. And then if you look at their Pays d'Auge regulation, which I believe the Chauffeur is no, do we have a Pays d'Auge? I don't think we do. But it's a more strict regulation and has to be done in a very specific area. That adds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more rules, 5 more laws about that. In American brandy. We have apple brandy, maybe designated as Applejack. And then the only actual law is that blended Applejack is now defined, and this is because of Laird's specifically, that at least 20% apple distillate with neutral grain spirit, and it must be aged for 4 years in used bourbon barrels. So it's like a blended scotch. That's what a blended Applejack legally is. There's only one person making it, and it's Laird's. But that's it. That's all the rules that we have. That's all the regulation that we have. And so we run into these confusing things in American Apple Brandy, which Applejack being one of them. Applejack legally can be used in tandem with apple brandy, but Applejack could also refer to fractional freezing of cider. So if you leave it outside and scrape off the water, has very minimal amounts of alcohol in it, and you can keep scraping off the water until you get a higher and higher ABV. It's not really done in practice. It's definitely not done commercially because it's not safe. But then at some point during colonialization, the South was really doing a lot more of calling it apple brandy and doing a distilling, and the North was doing Applejack. And then at some point, it all got mixed up and they became interchangeable. So it can be really confusing on that. Another thing that we have is Eau De Vie. When St. George came here from Germany, everything was called Eau De Vie. Eau De Vie is the water of life, which I would agree. And typically an Eau De Vie is something that's unaged, but it could be aged. But there's no legal definition of Eau De Vie, and a major hurdle that United States brandy makers have is to sell it. Who's going to buy brandy when bourbon is so hot? Thank you. And so if you put something weird on your label like Eau De Vie, nobody's going to know what that means. But if you put brandy on your label, even if it is an Eau De Vie, it's going to help sell it a little bit more because it's a term that's a little bit more familiar for everyone. And so without all these regulations, it can get confusing. But without all these regulations, you can do some cool experimental things as well. So it's really up to you to decide which one you prefer. Maybe it's a good mix of the two.
We could just talk a little bit about that. When she's mentioning Pays d'Auge, that's a region in Normandy. And Normandy is to the west of Paris. So it's about 2 hours from the west of Paris. So it's pretty easy and accessible in that way to go to that. And the appellation and control is under IDAC, IDAC, which is their kind of like with Champagne. It is a huge governing body. And they've been going through a couple of changes most recently because, well, they lost somebody recently, Jerome Dupont, who was really a big piece of that. And he was going to become the president. And we lost him prematurely last year. So now they're kind of getting their stride again. And they really, really super govern their Calvados. Specific to apples, the amount of maturing in the cask and the barrel, and all the way through. In order to get an appellation on a bottle of Calvados is a very strenuous process, and it isn't given out kind of willy-nilly, and because they want to have that tradition. So it's a really something to kind of, I highly respect them for that and for what they've really set up in that way. And you taste it in their product. You taste that finish and the years and the age of tradition. And I think that's something as an American to kind of be looking forward and being part of CiderDays myself for 25 years. I think that gives me a lot of hope that we could do that also in the U.S. to kind of like keep on moving up. And we want to. We want to be proud of the product we make and have some kind of like continuity there, a bar that we could kind of keep on moving our product up higher and higher at that same level and that tradition. And of course, we're a young country in that way.
And we can really make it our own. I mean, we shouldn't be making Calvados. Nobody here is saying that they're making Calvados because it is a protected AOC, just like nobody in the U.S. uses the word Pabo because it's an AOC protected designation, right? Right? No, I'm alone? Okay. It's true, though. It is an AOC. But I think it's very important for us to embrace our apples, our culture, and what we're doing, and having a slightly different product, American Apple Brandy. We're not doing Calvados. We don't have to. They're doing it already. But it's cool to see a single varietal. I'm really excited about that.
Yeah. And a little bit about Pays d'Auge. Their Calvados has to be made with, 75%
Calvados is 70% phenolic varieties, maximum of 15% acidic, and they have to be local, comprised of at least 20% of a nearby orchard.
And unfortunately, we don't have any tonight, but maybe next year at Cider Days, we'll have some from D'Enfronte, which is just south of Pédoge in Normandy. This is just another region. They're in Appellation, and they are making their Calvados with Poré or Perry. And right now, they're using 35% of Perry, blending it with a cider blend to make their Calvados. And having visited there, it's a very small group of farmers who are making Calvados. Probably I could count 10 on my hand, and that's it, that are really part of their own, what they call a band. You'll hear that a lot from Europeans, a band. It's kind of like a committee. And like that earlier photo of Philippe, the Perry farmer, he can't get rid of that Calvados. He's like, how can I do that? And I'm thinking, well, we'll just keep on having drinking parties like this, and I'll go over there. But it's very interesting. They have different regions over there, all in that same region, and different scripts that they're playing by. And with the Poré, it is, I keep on saying, why don't you just make it with 100% Poré? And I think they're kind of scratching their head saying, yeah, it's just, they've just been following a script, and I think it's going to be changing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pear brandy is amazing too.
Oh, it's amazing.
Before we start talking about stills, which are beautiful, amazing things, we can get into the Calvados. So now we're going to hop on a boat and go over to Normandy. Now we are number 4, which is Claque Pépine. Great. So this is Claque Pépine. It is named after the apple, which it's an apple variety that the seeds click inside. You can actually hear them rattling, which is where that came from. They use a mobile still. They still haven't invested in their own. And so if you see right here, this bottom left, this is the one at Christian Duran. That's his old one before it blew up about 8 years ago, severely hurting the distiller. Hey, you guys don't understand how dangerous stilling is. It's very high pressure. It's a lot of heat. It's very dangerous. He lived, thankfully. But so they discontinued the still, and now he has a big alembic. He has one large one, just like the one you see there. That right there on the other side is Boulard. They have 8 of those. I walked into that distillery and I was like, no way, you guys don't distill here. This is so pretty. It's like a Woodford Reserve, if you guys have ever been down there. It's just like, it looks like a dummy distillery. I'm like, this is just way too clean. But it's beautiful. It's an absolutely beautiful site. Boulard is one of the bigger Calvados companies. They're owned with 2 other kind of conglomerates, which is Pierre Maguire and Lecomte. And so they're all the bigger guys. But when I say bigger guys, I don't mean like Miller Coors or AB InBev. We're still talking about Calvados, which is a tiny, tiny little category. So they're not big and evil, but they're just bigger than a lot of the other family ones are. Anyway, Claque Pépine. The Fiend is going to be very young and bright. And as far as age statements go, it's very similar to how Cognac is. So for anything that's 2 years or above can be called Trois Étoiles, just 3 stars. Fiend or Trois Pommes. So you're getting, they're using 3s a lot, but they're talking about 2 years. The next age statement up would be a Vieux or Réserve, and that's going to be a 3-year or plus. The VO or the Vieux Réserve is 4 years or above, and we've heard of VO from Cognac. We have VSOP, which is 5 years or older, and then Hors d'Âge, Napoleon, Extra, XO, and Âge Inconnu, which is 6 years plus. So these age statements have to talk about the youngest Eau De Vie or Eau De Vie in the bottle, but they can be as old as they want them to be. And sometimes it can get really frustrating as an American. We're like, how, that's an XO. How old is it? Like 30, or they called it, I think it was Roger Gru. They call their Hors d'Âge, Hors d'Âge is what, 4 years? They call it an Hors d'Âge, but it's made with 30-year-old juice. And they're like, well, then why don't you just say that it's 30-year-old juice? And they're like, no, because it just tastes like an Hors d'Âge. They're like, but what does that mean? Okay, yep, that's fine. So they do have to have these minimums, But Calvados can just have a feeling. And so sometimes the age statement will reflect that. It's very romantic, isn't it? Yes, so we're at a fiend on this one. So we're going to get a lot of bright apple flavors, very young. I like my Calvados very young because I love that apple to be maintained and to really shine through. Can you guys taste the difference between the French and the American? Is it a strong contrast? The cuts? Not the cuts, but the gravity coming off the still and into the barrel. But they've been doing this for so many generations that you're taught to do it from a very young age. So they're making they're a little more familiar with making their cuts. And that's, I think, why it's a lot smoother. I have had some Calvados with some really bad cuts. It does happen, but it happens less often, for sure.
Should we just talk about what cuts are?
Yeah. So your cuts are, so when you're distilling, you have different temperatures that you're starting to move the liquid through. And at various temperatures, you remove water, alcohols. It's a lot more scientific than that. But what you're doing is you have your heads, or the tête in French. You have the heart, which is the corps, and you have the tails, which is the, I think it's radois. It's not the same word. And so by each temperature, you have these three different things. The heads at the beginning of the run usually get taken away from the hearts, and then the tails get discarded as well. So the center cut, the one that's closest to ethyl alcohol, is the one that you want the most, that tastes the best. When you say that they make good cuts or they make bad cuts, so sometimes if a distiller wants more product, they'll cut. They'll wait to cut out the heads or the tails. They'll add more of the heads or the tails into it so that they'll have more product. And sometimes this can taste not ideal. But if you can afford it and if you're really good at it, then you can narrow that the heart section down to be very small and be very nice quality.
We have another slide here. Why don't we go that and just show another still there?
Yeah, so these are column stills or hybrid stills, and those are pears down there. Those are all Bartlett's. This is at St. George. They have 6 stills in their place. And you can see that there's a copper. They also have a traditional copper pot too, right next to the column stills. But this brandy distillery is absolutely gorgeous, and it smelled great that day, and the pears were delicious. But so you can choose to use the plates or the pot stills. With a hybrid still, you can choose how to do it sometimes.
And some of the French makers are still using wood burning stills, and they aren't wanting to let go of that. And there's a little bit of a generational push on both ends. The new generation is coming up and wants to modernize, and the older generation is like, no, the temperature's not going to be right. Let's stick to the wood. So it's a kind of a great time to go over to France to really see kind of that change of hands. And what's your experience on that? Are you seeing that?
Roger Grew does wood burning still, and the smells in that distillery were amazing. I'm not sure about how it affects the distillate as much.
Well, they like to argue about it a lot, the fathers and sons.
Yeah,
typically
they do.
It's fathers and sons.
Mm-hmm.
But Père Jules, they're going to more modern. So they think they are. I don't know if they are.
Yeah. I'm not a distiller, obviously, but so I don't actually know how it affects the flavor. And I've never been able to really detect it because I've never seen a single distillery use wood for one and use steam or gas for the other. So I've never been able to side by side. So I'm not really sure if it actually changes the It's also really inefficient just in general. And you have to have a lot of your land has to be taken up by wood, which could be filled with apple trees instead.
Mm-hmm. They like it. So, the statement is, it could be inefficient, the wood, and the temperature fluctuation could be really different. But when you visit some of these makers who have been distilling for quite a while, they're like tried and true. It's that smell in that room, and it's almost like a smoking effect that is happening in there. I don't know. There's a couple of folks in here who were just in Normandy with me last year at Père Jules, and they were using a wood burning still, and did not want to change. I mean, it is a big argument right there. And I'm not sure if they're going over there yet. It's not going to happen. And when you're in that room with the wood burning and you're seeing the drip, 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 it's just kind of, I thought, well, maybe there is something going on there. There's something going on. Like we like to smoke with certain kind of wood, our fish, our meat, or something like that. And I could get that tradition. I could get that sense. And that's going back into that imagine what's in that glass and what that maker who brought us there to this moment right now is doing. We want to modernize, we want to be efficient, but sometimes tradition and just a craft is a little bit deeper than that. And I really respect that. So it'll be interesting. We'll have an update on that, I'm sure.
It's part of the art of distillation. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Here. Okay, right on. Good.
Cool. So number 5, we have Coquerel. This is a family-run company. Pierre is the name of the 4th generation distiller, I think. But yeah, Pierre he's young. He's one of those young generation guys. He is ready to innovate. He wants to see Calvados go to the cutting edge because really Calvados is an old man drink, which is probably why I love it so much because I am an old man. No, I am. But I would go out, if you go out in Normandy and you order a Calvados, I got looked at like I had 6 heads. One time, someone even put down like a cube of sugar next to the Calvados for me so that I could really enjoy it. But it's not for the young generation. And so Pierre Coquerel, he's really trying to figure out how to tap into this market. We've had many conversations. How do we get more people drinking Calvados? Cocktails is a route that a lot of people are thinking of to try and get the new generation in on it. What he's doing is he's actually changing the shape of his bottle to look more like a whiskey bottle. And he's finishing in different types of whiskey barrels. And he's trying to bring in more of the whiskey flavor to it. He brought a new expression that he had for me. And he said, "What do you think?" And I was like, "No, I like the old one." He's like, "My dad said the same thing." I'm like, yeah. But it is this grab to try and get the new generation in, and this struggle between tradition and it being perceived as an old person drink, and getting more people to buy it. Because honestly, nobody buys Calvados. Most people don't even know what it is, and that's a severe problem. In Paris, they drink whiskey. In all of France, whiskey is their number one spirit. They're huge consumers of whiskey, and there's only a couple places in Paris itself that you can actually go and get a few Calvados. This Coquerel here, this is his Fiend. So again, a young one, and I like this one a lot. I think the fruit really pops in this one. So he's doing pot still. And Coquerel is located down near the Donfrantais region. It's actually pretty far south in Normandy. And so he wants to start working with more pairs, which would be really cool to see.
And that region, just so you know, so there's Mont Saint-Michel. And so this is south of the Normandy, like D-Day beaches that are so well known from World War II, unfortunately, well known. But nonetheless, a very historical spot. And so it's like inland from Mont Saint-Michel, outside of Avarache, and in between there. And if you've been to Normandy and you know Musée de Poré, they just redid their museum there like in 2016 or so. So it's all in that area, really. So if you go to the Mont Saint-Michel, it's a nice place to visit if you can.
Mm-hmm. So a question about the barrels earlier, specifically in the Fiend. He's using 5 to 15-year-old barrels that have only ever contained Calvados. And that is a big... Let me go to the next one. I think it's under here. Yes, maturation. Ta-da. So with Americans, they're using a lot of ex-bourbon. In Calvados, they're using used Calvados barrels. And that's going to have a big difference in the flavor as well. It's more of a neutral barrel, more of a living, breathing organism that the Calvados gets to hang out in. And not so much of an imparting of flavors. Another big thing with Coquerel, which I think is really cool and something that we should all probably think of, is that they're really trying to become more eco-friendly. Distilleries are extremely wasteful. And over the past 3 years, he's reduced his gas emissions by 30%. He's installed new burners that are more efficient. And he's doing a lot to try and make sure that he can save and sustain and not add to all this climate change.
Yes, a question, Nicole. So let's just repeat the question. The question is, are the French Calvados kieved?
No. 9 times out of 10, no. They treat cider for Calvados completely different than cider. They just put it in the corner, and they're like, no, that's for distilling. They're not drinking it very much. And a lot of places in France, they're not really making cider, not as much as Calvados. Most places are Calvados over cider. Awesome. So with the cheeses, we have 2 types of Camembert. And so this is where Camembert comes from. Normandy's major export is actually dairy. It's more than apples. And they have a symbiotic relationship with the cows and the orchards. And Camembert, there are 4 AOCs for cheese. There's Camembert, Pont-l'Évêque, Livarot, and Neufchâtel. And those have to be made in a very regulated way, just like Calvados and cider is there. And we're thankful for it because it's really tasty. Do you know where this cheddar's from?
I believe the cheddar's from Vermont.
Awesome. We got a Vermont fan back there. And that's something to think about too when you're pairing spirits with cheese or Calvados with cheese or brandy in general. They tend to do a little bit bolder of a cheese with a little bit of a older spirit is loosely how it goes. Obviously, pairing is not a science. But so if you had something like a Pont-l'Évêque or a Livarot, I don't know if you guys have ever had those cheeses.
We tried getting that.
Oh, they're so stinky.
We tried.
I wouldn't have been able to smell anything but those cheeses. Then you would want to go with something like an Hors or something that would be able to stand up to that powerful smell. And then with cheddar, something that's a little sharper, you could go more barrel heavy. So one of the American ones would stand up to a cheddar just as well. And so that's what you're kind of thinking about is strength. And there are a lot of other nuances, but when you're doing spirits, you're going to look more for strength of what you're pairing it with. The barrels, the French even have regulations on the 3 different types of barrels that they're allowed to use. And then they also have 5 different types of wood that they use. It's very, very, very specific, which is so cool. In America, it's mostly ex-bourbon, but you do have a lot of these small distilleries that don't have space to get a full-size barrel, so they're using much smaller barrels, especially when they start out. And that's going to change the flavor because of surface area versus liquid and all those cool science facts. But their barrels are even regulated in France.
And some folks might be wondering, well, what happened to the barrels during World War II? Because some of these barrels are huge. And they would bury them. They would hide them. They had to, or they were drunk, by the invading forces of the Nazis. So it was a big deal, the barrels, to be able to go into some of these farms and to see, they're pretty musty rooms, and, like say 1769 on the barrel. And, I often will ask the maker, how did that barrel survive? Sometimes they'll be moving it, and they really guarded their barrels. It was like gold for the family in so many ways. And somehow, by hook or by crook, they were able to hide it or bury the barrels into the ground from the invading forces.
Roger Grew, they found so Roger Grew's 4 generations, but after the war, they found a false wall like many years later, and they took the wall down, and there were a bunch of barrels hidden behind a wall. And so they have 1939, 1938 Calvados there, which is pretty awesome.
The barrels and the Calvados are part of, it's like an heirloom to pass on from one family to another. And they would use it as a commodity to buy different things. And so Domaine DuPont is a good example of that. That's how they were able to buy that estate. They were, milk farmers. But they had this Calvados, these barrels of Calvados. And this is how they were able to buy that estate and become now a very renowned cider maker and Calvados producer.
Yeah, Christian Duran, he has a bunch of vintages now that he's named Guillaume. But his grandfather just shoved a bunch of barrels away for a really long time. And it wasn't until a couple generations down the line where they're like, why don't we sell this for a profit? Because you can get 1949 Calvados, just single vintages, which is really cool to see. And to do flights of each year to see how the different harvests and how the different seasons would change from vintage to vintage. And to have that kind of history and to have that kind of resource, it's really cool.
Which makes it difficult to import Calvados because a lot of importers don't want to wait for the Calvados to be ready because it takes a while for it to be aged. But at the same time, right now in France, there's a lot of barrels waiting to be imported, in my experience. And so if you are thinking of becoming an importer, I really want to encourage you to. And, talk to me. I'll talk to you about some folks that I would love to see succeed because without us celebrating this drink and bringing it forward, some of these farms might go down. And it's just a reality. In the same way that CiderDays was founded 25 years ago to help the local orchards and now kind of, I call this the shot that was heard around the world when CiderDays started 25 years ago. I feel like being here tonight with all of you, this is one of those moments in time too, because my hope is that you will go forward and be able to talk about American Brandy and Calvados and bring that forward and hopefully, probably save some apple trees and it really inspire people. Yes. So the question is, politically speaking, do the tariffs French wine go over to Calvados? Yeah, tariffs are high. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know specifically versus Calvados to wine. I don't know that, but that's always
the percentage. I'm not really sure what it is.
That's always going up and down, as we could see in the current political landscape. Tariffs are one of those like little poker game things going on, but I don't think that should deter us. If we worried about tariffs, if we worried about politics, there would be no Calvados. So I say just like raise your glass and keep on drinking and stay happy, right?
Cheers. So the last one here is the Chauffe Cœur. So it means warmed heart is what that actually means, which is what happens when you drink brandy. Your heart gets a little warmer. And this one here is the VSOP. And so this is a company that they actually own quite a few other distilleries and cheese places and a few other businesses. They own some places in Armagnac. They own some places in Cognac. So it's a French company that just kind of buys but maintains in that region, which is starting to happen more because if you're a very small farmer, it can be very hard to succeed and make a big profit if nobody's drinking the Calvados. But if you have the support of a bigger network, it's a little bit easier to survive. So that's the story with these guys. They're aged in oak barrels. So they're using Limousine is the name of their wood. So it's French. So I'm guessing that it's only seen Calvados. Double distillation. And they throw away the heads, the heads and the tails in the first run as well, which is a little bit intense. Sometimes you add some back in for the second run, but they cut it out completely. And they ferment in stainless steel. And what is the ABV on here? Yeah, 43% on this one. It's just a little bit higher. But this one's going to be a lot more rich. This is the oldest one that we have here tonight. And a big thank you to everyone that donated for us. And so we're really happy to have something that's been aged a little bit longer and something that's just a little more pricey. And then lastly, blending. Almost all of in Calvados, they're taking multiple barrels and blending them to get your finished product, which is a very, very difficult job. In the US, it depends on how big the distillery is. Copper and Kings are going to be blending pretty heavily. Reinhold doesn't have that many barrels to be blending with. They eventually will, but it kind of limits them. It's like a company like Johnny Walker. They have 150 distilleries at their disposal. So you can add a dash of salt here and add some ketchup here and make something that's going to be very consistent all of the time. But if you only have a couple of colors to work with in your palette, you're going to be a little bit more limited. And that's not to say that it's bad. It just means that it's going to be maybe not as consistent from one year to the next year because of the nature of the product and the size of the distillery.
We're going to have to start wrapping it up here tonight. First, I'd like to thank all the volunteers over there. Thank you. They did an amazing job setting up all this on all your plates. I'd like to thank all of you for all coming here from all over the map. Thank you very much. Ben out there with his unicorn and Hawks and Reeds for hosting us tonight. Ambrosia Borowski from the Northman. Thank you very much.
And Ria.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. That was a lot of fun, and I hope we get to do it again, perhaps next time with Calvados from Domfronte. And I sure really enjoyed being alongside Ambrosia Borowski, just an exemplary person and a wealth of knowledge, not only of spirits, but of cider too. If you'd like to see the show notes, you could go to episode 208 at ciderchat.com, where you will also find the slideshow presentation that we were referring to throughout this talk. This is Ria Windcaller, signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Like cider, we like palms, we love orchards and having fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. We like cider, we like palms, we like orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we do it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Oh yes there is. There is a reason. We like walking through the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Oh yes we do. We like palms. Oh yes we do. We love orchards, having some fun. There is a reason why we do it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. There is a reason why we do it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. There is a reason why we drink it like this. Ba-da-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum. We like walking down the orchards, dancing in the streets, smelling all the blossoms, kicking up our feet. Oh yeah. We like cider. Ba-da-da-dum. We like palms. Oh yes we do. We like orchards, having some fun. Yeehaw!